A struggling rancher met a deserted bride holding a baby and gave them a home before sunset. He woke up before the sun, as he always did, not because he wanted to, but because sleep no longer stayed with him very long. The small wooden house was quiet except for the sound of wind brushing against the walls. The roof creaked softly, reminding him that it needed repairs he could not afford. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks he had memorized over the years. Each crack felt like a reminder of time passing and chances slipping away. The rancher slowly sat up and placed his boots on the cold floor. He rubbed his tired eyes and let out a long breath. Another day, another fight to keep things going. He was not an old man, but life had made him feel older than his years. His hands were rough, his back often sore, and his heart heavy with worry. Still, he stood up, because standing up was what he had learned to do no matter how hard things became. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet. Once this ranch had been full of movement, animals grazing, fences freshly painted, laughter carried by the wind. Now much of it looked tired, just like him. The grass was thin in places where rain had not fallen in far too long. A few fence posts leaned at odd angles, held together by wire and hope. He looked over the land slowly, the same way he did every morning, as if checking to see whether it had given up during the night. He washed his face at the old sink, the water cold but refreshing. Breakfast was simple, stale bread and black coffee. He ate standing up, not because there was no chair, but because sitting felt like giving in to rest, and rest felt dangerous. There was always something that needed fixing, feeding, or checking. If he stopped, even for a little while, fear would creep in and remind him of bills he could not pay and letters he no longer opened. The ranch had belonged to his family for generations. His father had worked this land, and his father before him. When he was a boy, he believed the ranch would always survive, just like the stories said. Back then, his father's voice was strong, his mother's laughter filled the house, and the future felt wide open. But time had a way of taking things quietly, one by one, until only memories remained. When his parents passed away, the ranch became his responsibility overnight. He had told himself he could handle it. He was young, strong, and determined. For a while, things went well enough. But then came years of bad weather, rising costs, and fewer people willing to help. Friends moved away. Neighbors sold their land. Slowly, the ranch began to feel less like a legacy and more like a burden he could not put down. He stepped outside and walked toward the barn. The animals greeted him with familiar sounds. He spoke to them softly as he worked, even though no one was there to hear him. Talking to them helped ease the silence. Silence had become his closest companion and sometimes his worst enemy. In the quiet moments, doubts grew louder. He checked the feed carefully, measuring every portion. Waste was not an option anymore. Every small decision mattered. One mistake could mean losing what little he had left. As he worked, his mind drifted to the past, memories of people who once shared these mornings with him. He shook his head gently, as if to push those thoughts away. Looking back too much made the present harder to face. By mid-morning, the sun had risen higher, warming the land. Sweat formed on his brow as he fixed a loose fence wire with tools older than some of the buildings. His hands moved automatically. He had done this kind of work so many times that his body remembered even when his mind felt tired. Still, he paused now and then, resting his weight on the fence, staring out across the open field. He wondered how much longer he could keep this up. The question followed him everywhere, but he never answered it. Answering meant admitting the truth, that he was close to losing everything. The ranch, the house, the life he had built around them. Pride kept him going, but pride alone could not fix broken wood or pay overdue bills. Around noon, he returned to the house to prepare for a trip into town. He did not like going there anymore. Town reminded him of what he no longer had: connections, comfort, and a sense of belonging. People looked at him with quiet sympathy, and he hated that most of all. He did not want pity. He wanted a chance. He cleaned himself up as best he could, changed his shirt, and checked his wallet. The contents were thin, just enough for a few supplies. He hesitated for a moment before closing it. Every trip to town felt like a risk. Spending money meant survival today but worry tomorrow. Still, he needed feed and basic tools. There was no avoiding it. Before leaving, he stood at the door and looked back into the house. The rooms felt empty, even though the furniture was still there. Empty of voices, empty of warmth. He wondered when the house had started to feel more like a shelter than a home. He locked the door and walked to his truck, an old vehicle that had seen better days but, like him, refused to quit. The drive into town was long and quiet. The road cut through open land, dust rising behind the truck. He kept his eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel. The land looked endless, but he knew every mile of it. Every bend held memories, some good, some painful. He passed familiar landmarks and nodded slightly as if greeting old friends. In town, he moved quickly. He bought what he needed and nothing more. Conversations were short and polite. A few people asked how he was doing. He answered with the same simple words he always used, getting by. It was easier than explaining the truth. After loading the supplies into his truck, he took a moment to sit behind the wheel before starting the engine. He felt tired, more tired than usual. As he pulled out of town, the afternoon sun hung high in the sky. The road home stretched ahead of him, long and quiet once again. He did not know it yet, but this ordinary drive, one he had taken hundreds of times, would soon break the pattern of his lonely routine. For now, though, his mind was focused on making it through the day. He drove on, unaware that before the sun would set, his life would cross paths with someone who carried her own heavy story. Someone whose presence would challenge everything he believed about survival, kindness, and what it truly meant to have a home. The road back to the ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that made a person notice every sound. The truck's engine hummed steadily, and dust followed behind like a shadow. The rancher kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts wandered. He replayed numbers in his head, how much feed he bought, how long it would last, what repairs could wait. He told himself not to think too far ahead. Thinking too far ahead always brought worry. The sun leaned slightly toward the west, softening the light. He liked this part of the day. Afternoon gave him a short break from the heat and the pressure of morning work. He rolled down the window and let fresh air fill the cab. The smell of dry earth and grass reminded him why he stayed, even when staying felt hard. A few miles outside town, something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of light or his tired mind. He slowed the truck a little and looked again. Near the side of the road, standing where no one ever stood, was a woman. He eased off the gas. People did not walk this road often, and when they did, they usually had a reason, a broken vehicle, a long journey, or trouble. As he got closer, he noticed her clothes. She wore a long white dress, dusty and wrinkled, the kind usually seen only on special days. Her hair was loose and messy, and her face looked pale under the sun. Then he saw the baby. The child was wrapped in a thin blanket held close to her chest. The baby's small movements and soft cries drifted through the open window. The rancher felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel. His first thought was to keep driving. He had learned to mind his own business. Getting involved often meant problems he could not afford, but something made him slow down even more. He passed her, then stopped a short distance ahead. The truck idled as he sat there, arguing with himself. He thought of his empty house, his limited money, his already heavy load. Then he thought of the road, the heat, and a woman standing alone with a child. With a quiet sigh, he shifted into reverse and backed up slowly until he was near her. He rolled down the window all the way and spoke carefully, not wanting to scare her. "Are you all right?" he asked. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were tired and wide, filled with caution. She did not answer right away. She adjusted her hold on the baby as if protecting the child from the world. "I'm not looking for trouble," he added gently. "Just saw you standing out here." Her eyes searched his face, looking for signs of danger or kindness. Trust did not come easily to her, that much was clear. The baby let out a louder cry and she gently rocked the child, whispering calming words. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said finally. Those words landed heavily in the space between them. The rancher nodded slowly. He understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. "It's hot out here," he said. "At least take some water." "I was just walking." Accepting help meant trusting a stranger, and she had already learned how painful trust could be. "I won't force you," he said quickly. "Just thought I'd offer. Just for a little while." He knew what it was like to need space, even when surrounded by others. After a few minutes, she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." They drove on, the road stretching ahead. The baby finally quieted, resting against her chest. The rancher noticed how carefully she watched the child, as if afraid to blink. "My name is—" She stopped, then tried again. She told him her name softly. He nodded and told her his. No last names, just enough to make the space between them feel less empty. After another stretch of silence, she spoke again. "I was supposed to have a different day today." Of promises that disappeared when they were needed most. Of being left behind with no plan, no support, and a child who depended on her for everything. He listened without interrupting. He did not judge. He did not offer advice. He simply listened, and that seemed to help more than words. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. "So I just walked." He focused on the road, on driving steadily, on making sure the truck did not break down at the worst moment. As they drove, he became aware of something he had not felt in a long time. The cab no longer felt empty. The silence felt different, less heavy, less lonely. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know how this decision would affect his already fragile life. But as he glanced at the woman and the sleeping baby, he knew one thing for certain. Turning back had been the right choice. The sun had not yet set, but the day had already begun to change. The road grew narrower as they moved farther from town. The land opened wide on both sides, quiet and endless. The woman watched the scenery pass by, fields turning into open stretches of dry grass and scattered trees. She held the baby gently, adjusting the blanket whenever the child stirred. The rancher kept driving at a steady pace, careful not to hit the rough patches too hard. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable but thoughtful, as if both were sorting through things they had kept hidden for a long time. The rancher broke it first. "You can rest if you want," he said. "It's still a bit of a drive. You're safe right now." "I really did." Someone who would stand by her and the child they now shared. "But fear changes people," she said quietly. "When things became real, he ran." "I kept asking myself what I did wrong," she continued, "but there was no answer." They drove past a small bridge, then a stretch of road that dipped and rose gently. The rancher pointed ahead. "That's my land," he said. "Still a ways off, but that's where I'm headed." "Too quiet sometimes." But another voice, quieter but steadier, reminded him that doing nothing would have weighed heavier on his heart. The truck turned onto a dirt path leading toward the house. Dust rose around them. The baby stirred again and let out a small cry. The woman gently rocked the child, humming softly. The sound filled the cab, warm and human. When the house finally came into view, she fell silent. It was modest, worn by years of weather and use. Not ugly, but clearly tired. The barn stood nearby, paint faded, doors slightly uneven. "This is it," he said, unsure how it would look through her eyes. She studied the place carefully, then nodded. "It looks real," she said. "That's enough." "I don't expect anything from you," he said carefully. "You can stay a bit, rest, then decide what you want to do." Inside the house, the smell of wood and old furniture greeted them. It was clean but simple. He showed her the small room that used to belong to his mother. The bed was old but sturdy, covered with a plain blanket. "You can use this room," he said. "I'll get you some clean sheets." "It's more than I expected." The meal was simple, but it felt meaningful. They spoke about small things, the weather, the land, the baby's habits. Nothing heavy, just enough to feel normal. As the sun dipped lower, golden light filled the room. The rancher looked around and noticed something he had not felt in years. The house felt lived in again. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, the uncertainty did not feel so frightening. Outside, the sun moved closer to the horizon, and inside, 3 lives rested under the same roof, each carrying wounds, each finding quiet comfort in the presence of the others. Before sunset, something important had happened. Not a solution, not a promise, but a beginning. The light outside slowly softened as the sun moved closer to the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the land, touching the fences, the barn, and the quiet house. The rancher stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. The day had taken a turn he never expected, and his thoughts felt crowded. Still, there was work to do before night fully arrived. Inside the house, the woman gently laid the baby down on the bed. The child slept peacefully, small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She stood there for a long moment, just watching. For the first time since the morning, she did not feel rushed. The fear that had been pushing her forward all day slowly loosened its grip. She walked back into the main room and found the rancher gathering firewood near the door. "Can I help?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to." Neither wanted to say the wrong thing or break the fragile calm that had settled between them. As the fire crackled to life, warmth filled the room. The light danced on the walls, making the house feel less tired, less lonely. The rancher leaned back in his chair, watching the flames. He hadn't lit the fireplace in a long time. There had never seemed to be a reason. The woman sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. The baby stirred in the other room but did not wake. "I don't know how long I'll stay," she said quietly. "That's okay," he replied. "You don't need to decide tonight." Silence returned, but it felt warm now, comfortable. Outside, the sky shifted through shades of orange and purple. Night was approaching, slow and gentle. As darkness settled, the rancher stood and prepared a simple supper. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, though he felt strangely nervous. He had cooked for himself for years, but cooking for someone else felt different. Meaningful, they ate together again, this time slower. The woman smiled faintly between bites, and he noticed how her expression had changed since the afternoon. She still looked tired, but there was less fear in her eyes. After the meal, she offered to wash the dishes. He hesitated, then allowed it. Watching someone else stand at the sink made the house feel alive in a way he had forgotten. Later, he showed her where extra blankets were kept and where she could find water if the baby needed it during the night. His voice was calm, steady, though inside his thoughts raced. When everything was settled, he stepped outside once more. The stars were beginning to appear, bright and clear. The land was quiet but not empty. He rested his hands on the fence and stared out into the darkness. Doubt returned, creeping softly. He thought about the cost of another mouth to feed, the uncertainty of tomorrow, the fragile state of his own life. He wondered if he had made a mistake by letting his heart decide instead of his head. But then he heard the baby's soft sound drifting through the open window. Not crying, just a small, sleepy noise. And beneath it, the woman's gentle voice, calm and steady. Something inside him eased. He realized that the weight he had been carrying for so long had shifted. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer his alone. And somehow that made it lighter. Inside, the woman sat beside the bed, humming quietly. She had expected the night to be frightening, full of unknowns. Instead, she felt safe. Not because everything was solved, but because someone had chosen to care without asking for anything in return. She lay down carefully, the baby beside her, wrapped warmly. The room was simple, but it felt like shelter in the truest sense. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion finally take over. In the other room, the rancher sat at the table for a while, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. He thought about his parents, about the life he once imagined, about the way kindness had found him when he least expected it. Before heading to bed, he checked the doors and made sure the fire was safe. He paused outside her room for a brief moment, then quietly walked away, respecting her rest. That night, the ranch did not feel like a place he was struggling to save. It felt like a home again. The sun had set long ago, but something new had already begun. Morning arrived slowly, carried in by soft light slipping through the thin curtains. The rancher woke before the sun as usual, but something felt different. The house was not silent in the way it used to be. There were small sounds now, gentle movement, a quiet breath, life beyond his own routine. He lay still for a moment, listening. From the other room came the soft sound of the baby waking, followed by the woman's calm, comforting voice. It was not loud, not demanding. Just present. He closed his eyes briefly and let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding for years. He rose, dressed quietly, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool and fresh. Dew rested on the grass and the sky held the pale colors of a new day. He walked across the yard, checking the animals as he always did, but his steps felt lighter. The land looked the same, yet it felt changed, like it was watching him back, waiting. When he returned to the house, the woman was already awake. She stood near the table, gently rocking the baby, who was now calm and alert, eyes wide with curiosity. "Good morning," she said softly, unsure if the greeting was welcome. "Morning," he replied, and surprised himself by smiling. He put on water for coffee and took out what little food he had left. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They ate together quietly. The baby sat cradled in her arms, small fingers curling around the edge of her dress. After breakfast, the rancher hesitated, then spoke. "You're welcome to stay today. No pressure, just rest. I can help with small things if you want." At midday, he returned from the barn to find her sitting on the porch, humming softly while the baby slept in her arms. The sound stopped him in his tracks. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching. The ranch had not heard a sound like that in years. He cleared his throat, not wanting to startle her. She looked up and smiled, this time without sadness behind it. "It's peaceful here," she said. He nodded. "It used to be." "You don't have to stay close," he said. "I'll be fine." "I don't know what comes next," she said softly. "Neither do I," he replied. She looked at him. But today was good. The future was still uncertain, but he was no longer facing it alone. And for the woman, the road that had felt endless the day before now had a place to pause, a place where she was not invisible, a place where her child was safe. Night fell gently over the land. The stars returned, bright and steady. Inside the house, a small family, formed not by plans but by compassion, settled into rest. Nothing was perfect, nothing was guaranteed, but hope, quiet and real, had found a place to stay.